There is an issue, like I said last time, where if you have more than one thing open, sometimes Mari will just obviously crash out. Okay, so the best thing is do your stuff in Maya or Photoshop, close out of everything, and then open up Mari. Yeah. So I'm going to show just a couple items here. So here is a cone that I have. Now if I wanted to texture this cone inside of Mari, I have to keep in mind what it's going to look like. If I bring it in like this, that's what it's going to look like inside Mari. So I'm not going to be able to paint like a really nice smooth texture going around it if it's all blocky. So I'm going to duplicate this just so I have an extra one. And then on one of these I'm going to smooth it out. Okay? So this gives me kind of like an intermediate version that is not so blocky yet not so smooth. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my export the selection. I'm going to call this smooth cone. There we go. And I'm going to export it as an OBJ. Okay, just like we did before. And then while I'm here, if I'm going to paint anything else in Mari, like let's say this sign, I'd want to bring that in too. Now everything you bring in, surface shader 1, make sure the UVs are laid out. If you don't do the UV layout, then there's no point even trying to take it in there because it's not going to do any good. Number 4. There it is. Okay, so like this sign here does not have the UVs properly laid out. So I would of course want to go into my UVs and lay them out. So I would, in this case, probably just use automatic. And then scale it up this direction. There we go. Go to the top view, maybe a little bit here. There you go. So that looks pretty square. And then if I had multiple signs inside my scene, I'm going to go to my image and turn this off. I may want to fit them all into one texture. Remember, when you hit that render button, what happens is all of those textures have to be converted and then rendered out. So if you have 5 textures, it's going to render a lot quicker than if you had 50 textures. So the less amount of textures you have, the better as far as speed goes. But the more texture detail you have, the more realistic stuff is going to look. So you got to find that good balance. So let's say I have 2 signs. I want them to look completely different. So I can go to my UVs, my shells, and I can shrink this down just so it kind of fits off to the side like this. And then if I were to duplicate this one and scoot it over, then I can just grab these UVs and just scoot that up. Okay, now I have 2 different areas where these UVs could be. Now I could even go so far as to pack also inside of this thing this, right? So if I grab this and I laid out the UVs for this one, so I would just go to my surface shader, I would go to my UVs, probably automatic on this one too, just because it's so weird looking. And I don't know why this is over here, get back over there.
So do we have to do all the texturing in Maya, or can we do some of the items, say maybe the more solid color items just in Maya?
Right. You meant Mari for the first one. Yes, yeah, you could do some of your texturing in Maya, some in Mari. Now the idea is that the stuff that is more of like front and center, the stuff you're going to see, the stuff that needs the detail, you'd want to do that inside of Mari, just so you have enough detail to make sure it looks real. And then all the other stuff that you don't really see, you can do that inside of Maya. There we go. Okay, so that's pretty square. You can see all the divisions and stuff that are here. And then all I have to do is grab all these items, so these 3. Actually, I need another sign holder. There we go. And let me scoot this one over first, just so it's out of the way. There we go. Okay. So then I can take this and just start to organize it so all of these fit within one texture. Now again, this might seem like a hassle, like I'd rather just do it the harder way and just leave everything as separate textures, because in one sense it's actually kind of easier because you don't have to really think about it. You just make the texture and go, make the texture and go. But then it'll really come to bite you in the butt if you don't do it this way, because then you have to make a new material for each one of these and you have to control the material for each one of these. I'm going to take these ones, and this is where it becomes more like a puzzle. Like, where do I put this? I'm just going to shuffle this right there. I'll grab all these.
So you never just automatically let it do it for you?
No.
Oh.
Because if I didn't unfold at this point, they would probably go crazy. The UVs look like they're pretty laid out, so I don't want Maya to have to then go and try to lay it out again, because it'll probably distort it or tweak it or whatever.
But doesn't it, if you have like them already set up, the UVs, if you hit that button at the top, it just...
I'm talking about the layout one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work. And sometimes it'll put them in like weird spots, where this way I know exactly where they're all going to be. So I have, again, just more control over their placement. There we go. Alright, so I'm just going to scoot this one in a little bit closer here. And if I get to the point where I'm like, okay, well, this stuff is obviously not going to fit in here, I think it's going to be close, I could always just scale everything down a smidge, and then they will. So I grab everything, scale it down just a bit. And then it'll all fit in there. Okay, so some things that the layout tool will actually do is like these signs that make more sense to be vertical. Sometimes they'll rotate them, just because if they rotate it, then they can fit so many more going this way or that way or whatever. And then all of these little pieces that are here, they'll try to shove those into these little crevices, and if I try to select them, then it becomes a bit more difficult to do. All right, so now I have two signs all set up, ready to go. So then I can export all this stuff out here. And then I'll export this out as my selection, signposts. And some of these you may not want to do the full texture on. You may want to just do a portion of it on there, okay? You may want to grab just this and maybe just add some scuff or dirt or whatever to parts of this on top of the texture you have. So just like when we did our primers, where we were adding textures on top of the metal and on top of the wood, we could do that to this also. I don't think the UVs are laid on these. I think this is just, no it is, okay. Alright, so these ones have the UVs laid out also, and again, if I'm bringing in multiple ones and I don't want these to all look exactly the same, I'd want to shuffle these around. Now just so we can see, let's say I grabbed all of these and I did the layout on this. That's not actually bad, just because it has less smaller parts than the other one did. That works, cool. And then where's my other ones? Let's just do all these. Oops, this. And then I also want to grab the little pieces here. All right, that's all of them. Go to shelves, grab it all, lay it out. Okay. And then I like to scale it down too. I don't like to get too close to the edge. It's actually not bad. Okay. So never mind, I'll just leave it there. Alright, so now we'll go back to object mode. We'll export these out. And what I'm doing is exporting everything out in a group of what I would want to paint together. So if I had these items that obviously go together, I want to export those out together, not individually. And these are rope posts. Okay, so now that's good. I'm going to save my scene. Yes, I'm going to close. Make sure all these are closed. All those are closed. Alright, then we open up Mari, and then we hope everything's good. So, just like before, you have a bunch of textures you want to also kind of collect. And like I said before, you may want to start not hoarding these, but maybe stockpiling different textures. Because it becomes very easy to say I need a metal and go into your texture library and grab a metal you already have instead of spending 10 or 15 minutes trying to look for one that, again, you probably already have inside of your system, because we're typically drawn to the same kinds of materials. Like these ones here, I've used these a dozen times at least. Same thing with these woods. I've used these over a dozen times just because they're nice looking wood textures. Alright, Mari's still thinking about opening. Alright, one of the issues we're going to have when we get into Mari, or one of the things we're going to control, is how we're painting. So by default, what happens is every time you paint, imagine that the screen is a canvas, okay? So imagine you have 128 pixels going horizontally and 128 pixels going top to bottom. That's not a lot of detail that we can paint on, okay? Even if our texture is 4,000 pixels, we're only painting at a certain resolution on the screen. So we'll see how we can adjust that also. So I'm going to go to a new document. This should be a review. We should already have gone through this and understand how to do this. Go through this, environments, scenes, and we'll go to the smooth cone first. So I'm going to grab my smooth cone. I'm going to go to my color. Now for the texture for the cones, I really don't need a 4,000 pixel texture for the cone. It doesn't hurt, except for speed-wise, to go at a 4,000 size and then shrink it down, because you never know if you do want a bigger size, okay? So I'm going to keep this at 4096, but I'm going to keep in mind that I may want to shrink that down to 1024 or 2048 before I go to my final render, okay? Oops. And then for my root path, I always hit scan, don't hit scan. I'm going to just set that to my Mari cache for now. That's where typically your texture goes here. I just throw it into there because I don't care. I'll save it where I want to save it later. And then my fill is basically your default color. So what color do you want the default color of this cone to be? Again, you may want to use reference for this. That's not YouTube. It's going to help me. It's Google.
You're using Google.
I know. Well, now that we learned that Google and Bing are pretty much the same. So we're going to go with orange, right? Obviously, we could have just realized that, but it always helps to look it up because...
$50 for them cones.
There we go.
See that?
That's a deal.
I see all those run over all the
There
time.
we go. All right, so now it's loading into a memory and giving us our default color. There it is. Okay, so there's our default cone. Now we could add other channels here. We typically don't need to for what we're doing with this, but just so you're aware of it, you could paint things like specular and dirt maps and reflectivity and all this other stuff. Typically you start off with your color channel, and then you'll duplicate it and start adding other channels on top of it once you have your color channel set up. So if you're doing skin, you don't just paint the skin color, you have to paint like everything that's underneath the skin to get it to look the way it looks, okay? If you forget to make your color channel, like if I just delete this, I don't have anything to paint on right now. There's nothing for me to do. So I can just go here, say I want a 4,000 pixel image, hit black, and now I have a quick channel. That's my color channel. Okay, so it's a quick way to add a new channel into this. I'm gonna just undo. There we go. Now we're back to that. All right, so we've seen the image manager where we can go in and drop images. So if I found something in here that I wanted to use. Now again, this is a cone, so there's not going to be a whole lot of like metal or plastic or anything in it, but it does have like some scuffs or scratches or you know, little details I may want to add. So what I do is, as I'm looking at these, I'm not necessarily looking at what does a cone look like. I'm looking at dirty. What does a dirty traffic cone look like? Okay, so how can I find a texture that has these kinds of like smudges and detail marks on them? That's what I'm looking for. So when I go in here, I'm just trying to find something that has some nice bits of detail to it. and stuff that's also organic. I don't want it to look too uniform like this. That looks weird. This could work out pretty good. That looks like it has some nice detail to it. Obviously the woods aren't doing anything for me. Actually, like this metal here and here are kind of nice. So I'm going to drop that one in there. And I'll also drop in that. And I'll also drop in that. Okay. So now I have 3 textures inside there. Under the shaders, I'll pull this out so we can see it. This is controlling basically the diffuse for the shader. It's controlling the specular for it. So if you realize that in Maya or Mari or wherever, or not Mari, in Maya or V-Ray or wherever you're taking this, you don't want as much specular. It sucks to have it up this high and try to paint that. So you can just tone it down. Okay? And then you can also adjust the spread of it too. Maybe it is a sharp object and you want to see what it looks like, or maybe it is spread out a bit more. Okay? So this is just to help you kind of preview that. Typically I don't need to adjust this, so I just set that and forget it. We have our basic brushes. So one of the things that people just forget about are the different brushes. If you always paint with the default brush, it's always going to look the same. Venture in here and play with these different brushes. This felt tip one, even though it says felt tip, it's actually a pretty nice brush to add some nice little blotchy detail to things. Here's the hard surface brushes. I use these too. These are just pictures inside this. Now you could use Photoshop to make brushes, the same Photoshop PSD brushes that are out there. Going to Google, typing in PSD brushes or Photoshop brushes. And you could download a bunch of different kinds of brushes. So if you needed something that was like smoke or blood or whatever, you could download these and load these into Mari to use as your brushes. Okay? Here's another one that I'll use. This one kind of looks like the felt tip. It's exactly the felt tip. And then there's dirty drip and scuff and whatever else. Okay? It's thinking because this is a big brush. All of these are huge brushes. So anytime you click on them, it does take a minute for it to realize you want to load that brush. There it is. Okay, so for now I'm just going to go back to, I'm just going to go to an organic brush, maybe. There it is. And then there's Brad's brushes. Okay, so play with the different brushes because it'll really help your stuff look a lot better than just default whatever it is. Okay. Down here, let's minimize that. Pull this up. There we go. Okay. So down here we have layers. And layers we've talked about before. We can add a base layer, which is like the orange that we have here. And then we can add other layers on top of it. So if I wanted to add the stripe in here, if I wanted to do smudges or dirt or whatever, keep everything on a separate layer. Because if you do, it's easier to take things off. So for this, I want to have these little white stripes that are inside here. So I'm going to go to a side view. I'm going to make a new layer. I'll double click it and call it stripes. And I'm going to paint it. Now for this, I wouldn't want to use this brush because it's just a streaky brush. So I would go back to my shelf. And then for this one, I would just use, like a hard brush like that. Okay. I'm going to go to my color. I'm going to attempt, let me save. I'm going to attempt to move this up here. That way I can actually see my color a bit better. So I am painting with white. That's awesome. Now if I were to shrink my brush down and brush across and then hit Alt and spin around, you'll see that it only painted on half of this. Okay? And the reason for that is right now it's only set to paint the front. So whatever we're seeing, that's what we're painting. Okay? But what I want to do is paint straight through it. So over here in my projection settings are things like I want to project through the front or through. So setting it to through, as I paint like this, and then I spin around, you'll see that it paints all the way around the object. Now that's important because if you're painting an object and like in the animation class we have this fish. So we're looking at the side view of the fish, we're projecting the texture straight through the fish. But then we turn and we want to paint the top of the fish. So if we turn and we're painting the top, well, it's also painting the bottom of the fish too, because of the angle that we're at, because it's painting straight through the fish. So that's where we would want to turn projection to just front, okay? So I have one stripe. Let me add, they all have 2 stripes, yeah? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to add another stripe inside here too. Okay, and I am holding shift so it doesn't go crazy. You can see this one's kind of wonky, so I'll just fix that. There we go. So now I hold Alt and drag, excuse me, and now we have the stripes around the cone. All right, so now I can go through and let's see, let's paint some other stuff. Let's say I want to paint some dirt on here. Okay, now I could go through my image manager and I could bring in a picture like this, shrink it down, put that back up to where it was, go to my layer, make a new layer, and call this dirt. Go to my shelf. Let's see, organic brushes. The organic ones are actually like skin and stuff, so it's hard to see when I have this expanded like that. But you can see there's octo skin, skin, gecko skin. So these hard surface brushes are actually pretty sweet. I'll go to this one. Okay. It's hard to see too, changing the opacity. Shift minus on your regular keyboard will take the opacity down of that image. It doesn't change how it paints, it just changes what we see. Okay, so I'm going to go back to projection. Make sure it's not painting through. Again, if I paint through, it's going to paint straight through this object and onto the other parts of it. That's going to look weird. So I want to paint just the front, just so whatever I'm seeing, that's what I'm painting. Okay, now as I zoom in and out, it's important to note that where we're at is the resolution we're painting on. So if I zoom really far out like this, and I started painting this, that texture is going to be huge on that cone. If I zoom in on this, and I do that, the texture is going to be a bit more refined and not so clunky. Okay, just so you can see the difference, I'm going to paint a little area here, like that. I'll hold Alt or hit Alt to bake it in there. Then I'll zoom out, shrink this down, shrink that down. I'll paint a little area next to it, a little bit smaller. Barely see it. Okay, now if we zoom in and look at the side by side, look at how horrible this one looks. There's like no detail there. We've zoomed out too far, okay? And the other one is actually pretty decent. We're up close enough where we can see it. So what we don't want to do is constantly zoom in and out while we're painting, because that will cause us to lose resolution. If I zoomed out to paint this part, I zoomed in to paint that part, it's going to look funny. So ideally what you want to do is find a good zoom like this, and then just spin around the object. Because as you spin around, we're not zooming in and out at all. We're simply just changing where we're at or what we're looking at. Okay, even panning like this we can do. We just don't want to be zooming in and out. Okay. Now the other thing, my texture is 4,000 pixels. Okay, so what I'm painting here is 4,000 pixels. But my view, okay, when we project this texture, it's only projecting it at 2,000 pixels. So it's actually projecting it less. So under my painting, under my paint buffer, this is the size of the paint buffer that I'm currently using. Okay, so what happens is when we do this projection, imagine that this picture, there we go. Imagine that this picture is filling the screen and it automatically resizes it to 2,000 pixels. Okay, so it doesn't matter if I'm zoomed way out like this or zoomed way in like this, it's still 2,000 pixels. So as we start to paint this, we're only painting with 2,000 pixels, so we can actually lose, again, quality of our work. So if my texture is 4,000, I'm going to set this to also 4,000. So then as I start to paint this, you can again see how much clearer this texture is compared to the one next to it. Okay, you can see how much crisper this texture is compared to that texture, just because I've upped that paint buffer. Okay, so these are all things you want to pay attention to, because as you start to paint your stuff, you don't want to get to the end of it. You spent 2 days, let's say, painting all your stuff. You bring it back into Maya and it looks like junk because you didn't make sure that the resolution was high enough. okay? Or you paint this side and all of a sudden that side's getting painted. Obviously you don't want that either. Okay, so a couple things that I do. I always come in here and change this to 4096. I always go to my projection and make sure I'm projected on what I want to project it on. Now another thing we can do is select certain items and paint just on them. So right now the default is project on all, meaning anything I paint, it projects onto it. But I could say only the selected items, and then I could use my selection to grab stuff. Okay, so I go to my selection. This is how I select items, and then this is how it figures out what else I want to select. So if I did this to patch, okay, our UV square is one patch. Sorry. Yeah, our UV section is one patch, that's right. And then this one is faces, so then I could grab individual faces. And then this one allows me to grab pieces, and what it does is it grabs what the UVs are, where the UVs are separated. So if I go to my UV, you'll see how it grabbed just that one section here. So here it's not terribly important, but imagine when I get to my other one where I have all the bars and I may want to isolate just one bar and just paint that one bar without painting everything else, I can do that. I can grab just those pieces. Okay, so for this I really don't need to because it's only one object. So I'm just going to go back to my paint on all, go back to my image brush, and let me clear this out. So I'm just going to remove the layer, add it back in. Okay. There's also a stamp repeat image, right? So when I get to here, it stops painting. But if I hit the semicolon, it's going to keep painting. And what it does is it just not mirrors it, but it just repeats that texture. Now because this texture isn't repeatable, you'll see that it obviously leaves a line here, okay? But I can very quickly go over it. Now look at that brush, how neat that is looking, where it just kind of like blotches it on there like it should. Instead of it being, where's that horrible brush, basic brush, this. Instead of softly putting it on there, that doesn't look real at all, right? So you want to grab something that makes it look a little bit more real. Even some of these, I don't even know what I have here. I might have a freckle or a vein or something. Even some of these can give you some really neat looks in how it puts the texture onto this. Okay. Now another thing that we're seeing here is that as I get towards those edges, my texture is kind of stretching out. And we've looked at this before. So under my projection, I'm going to preview my mask, okay? And then I want to enable my edge mask. And what this is going to do is allow me to not paint on the edges, okay? So I open this up, I come down to my end, and I tweak this until I have a nice softness right here. Okay, and what that's going to do is make sure that I'm not painting right on those edges. You can see that it won't let me paint right on that edge. And what that means is that I won't get much, if any, streaking right there, and then I can just come back in after and start to paint this. And then I could rotate it around, maybe make my brush a little bit bigger, maybe scoot this up, and then paint some more. And then spin around again, and do that. And then spin around again, and do that. Okay, so now we have this messy stuff here, and then I could just kind of paint in some of these areas so it doesn't look so funky. Now as I hold shift and I move this around, it's not writing out the texture every time. It only writes the texture when you hit Alt. So when I hit Alt, it'll write the texture out. Otherwise, it's still keeping it in the memory. Okay, hit Alt, it writes it out. We're spinning around. Hit Alt, it writes it out. Okay, now this is also important because watch what I do here. So I'm painting right here. Now before I hit Alt, I'm going to switch to the UV. Now what happened was, when I switched to the UV, the stuff that I just painted stays frozen on the screen, and it comes over right here. Okay, now it's a little bit tricky to see because you can't really see it because of what I just painted. But let me make a new layer. And I'll just paint with a horrible, ugly color. There we go. So I'm painting with green, right? So I just go in with my green brush and I just go whee, like that, okay? So I switch to my UV and you'll see that that is now here, okay? That hasn't been baked into the texture yet. It's basically just kind of like, is this where you want it? Or is this where you want it? Which spot do you want this texture to be? If I hit Alt right here, it locks it into this area. And then I can switch to the UVs and you can see where it wrote it out. If I drew this here like this, okay, see how it's on just this one side? Then I switch to the UVs and then I hit Alt. What it's going to do is it's going to write it out to the entire thing. So that when I come back to this, look at how messy this is now. Okay? Because I didn't hit Alt before I switched over there. So you have to be kind of careful about that kind of stuff. So let me delete the layer here. All right, so let's add some more noise to this, a little bit more detail to it. So let's say we didn't want to use an image. We don't want to grab a metal texture or whatever. We just want to paint this right with our own colors that we've chosen. So I'm going to go and pick, I'll pick a Brad brush. Maybe I'll pick a Brad brush. There we go. I'm going to save the stuff I'm doing here. All right, and then I'm going to go to my color, and then I'll pick a color. So let's say I wanted just this brown, dirty color, okay? Nope, I want a new layer here. I'm going to call this noise. I'll go to my painting. Oops, sorry, projection, wrong one. And I'm going to enable the fractal noise mask. Okay. Now what this is imagine instead of having a texture we brought in, we're going to have a noise pattern. Okay. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm just going to adjust, let's say, the contrast, and maybe I'll pull the roughness up a little bit. There we go. And pull the size to a good amount. Okay. So basically, where this is red, I don't know why I'm on that. Where this is red, it's not going to paint, and where it's not red, it is going to paint. Okay, so as I take this brush, and I'm going to hit O for opacity and pull this down some. It's be a little bit too opaque. There we go. And the opacity is right here, your radius is right here, and your flow is there. So you can adjust all these up there too. So as I paint on here, what it's going to do is just paint into those areas and just give me a little bit of noise, a little bit of detail, without having to bring in a texture and paint it all over the place. Okay? Instead of getting this metal and painting the metal all over the entire thing, it just paints it into these areas, which gives it a nice effect. So I'm going to hit Alt just so we can see it. Now with the mask on here, it's very distracting. You can't see what you're actually painting. Okay? We don't need to see the mask in order for it to work. So we can just turn this off. And now we can see that there definitely is some grungy stuff happening there. To emphasize it, if I turn the junk off, now look at what we've just added. Okay, there's no texture there. It's simply a noise pattern used for us to paint, kind of like a mask that we're using to paint to create that. Okay, so we can use this on top of even one of these. So if I grab an image, I think it's loading. I just need to, yeah, there it is. I didn't push it down. We'll grab this one again. Okay, so I'm going to drag this one in again. I'm going to shift minus just so I don't see it as much. There we go. Okay. I can't see it at all. I don't need to see it. Let me spin around to this side, and then I'm just going to start painting. And so what I'm doing is, again, I'm painting now with the image, but with this mask on. And so it creates this really cool effect of this blotchiness, okay? And if we're trying to create something like rust, we don't want to have a nice smooth object and then a patch of rust. We want it to look spotty and speckled. So you can see very easily how we can do this. I just added this fractal noise mask, drop the image in here. And then it's just a matter of what do I want to look like. Okay, so I can take this, there we go. There's my layer. I can add my junk layer on here. Maybe I'll knock the junk layer's opacity down some. Or maybe not. Maybe I'll leave it up where it is and just change the mode. That looks horrible. Oh, that one looked good. Luminance. Yeah. That looks kind of neat. Okay. So I like the way that looks, so I'll leave that on, right? And that's the idea, is that it's not necessarily I'm going to go into this and I'm going to know exactly what buttons to hit, what textures to drop on. It's all about experimentation and playing with what you want these things to look like. So once I have this, I drop back to my channels. Obviously save this first. I go to my export out. Now there's two exports. The first one is export the current channel. All channels export everything. And the other one is flattened. If I export like this, it's going to take each one of my layers out and save each one of my layers. So then I could go into Photoshop and I could play with the adjustments of each layer. Okay? Or what I could do is if I export out each one of those flat or each one of those separately, I could use, let's say, not the base, not the stripe, but I could use this as like a bump map, right? Because why not use that as a bump map? And now I have this nice smooth cone. I don't want that to be bumpy. I want that to be bumpy. So then I can export these out and then put the stuff together. Okay? So again, looking back at that first assignment where we did the primers, where we had that sphere and we were adding textures to it, it's the same thing. It's just a matter of we're building the textures now. So I'm going to export this out two ways. One of them I'm going to export out just the current channel because that's all we have. And where do I want to put it? I'm going to go put it, of course there's nowhere I want to put it. There. Environment. Source images. Okay. Do not change most of this stuff here. Okay. This here, this $UDIM, a couple of you already had this issue. That's where it's at inside of your UVs. So if you get rid of this, it may not write out your stuff correctly. So what I'm going to do is I can replace just this channel name. Personally, I like to just export it out and then go into Windows and rename the stuff. Okay. So I'm going to export it out just like it is. I'm going to say export all patches. Export all patches. There we go. Now I didn't export that one flattened, and so what happens is it wants me to save each one of those. So if I go into here, oh, that's the wrong folder. Work, environment, source images. Here are my 4 layers: stripes, noise, junk, and base. Okay, so those are my 4 layers I have here. Now I'm going to right click and I'm going to export it flattened, and then just say export all patches. Okay, so now what I should have is a 5th image in here. There it is, the flattened image. All right, so now, just so Mari doesn't freak out, I'm going to save and close. I might save.
What's the shortcut for adjusting the brush size?
R.
Okay.
Radius right there.
Oh.
And then you could rotate it too. So if you're not liking, that pattern, then you can rotate it.
Hey, turn off those quick keys.
Doesn't it just rotate the image?
How do you turn them off?
Take them off of the screen because that's going to be annoying.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
In the preferences, there's a spot where you could turn it off. I forget where it is, but it's under one of the edit preferences. What was your question, Veronica?
Doesn't it just rotate the image?
Oh, Mari.
Oh, I guess.
That's fine. No, it would rotate the brush. If you use the R radius, or the one that's on the far left, that'll rotate the brush. Mm-hmm. If you use Control, I think it's Control, that rotates the image. Okay. Now it should have saved all my stuff because I already set it up to save it. Now, if you have a computer next to you that's not being used, don't be afraid to, because of the thing we're dealing with Mari. Open up Mari on this computer, do all your textures. Use Maya on this computer, and then just save your stuff back and forth. It'll work a little bit quicker. All right, so here's my cones. So I'm going to grab the cones. All right, I'm going to go to my new materials. And remember I said I'm using V-Ray, so I'm going to use V-Ray material. You could use Mental Ray and just use the same material. The same stuff we've already gone through at this point. We've already done all of these steps. Just a matter of testing it to see what it looks like. So I'm going to add to my color. And my diffuse color is just going to be that file. The flattened out image. Okay, so there's my flattened out image. And again, you'll see that all of these look exactly alike. This one looks the same as that one, looks the same as all of these, which is why at some point you may want to make new textures. You don't have to make everyone a new texture because we can kind of get away with some stuff, right? Oh, get out of there.
Turn it around, like
Right.
rotate it.
You can just rotate it, right? So if we just rotate this, then we're actually using a different side of that. But even with that, if we had something really pretty distinct on it, right? If we had, DPW, but it was like exactly the same kind of scruff mark and we saw it in several cones, then we may want to go into it and start tweaking things and adding different stuff to that, okay? Especially if we have the layers here, we can just go into the layers even and just add a little bit of different text to each one or different something to each one to make it appear a little bit different. Even just going into like the base and just adjusting that color, that'll help too, just making it look a bit different. Why is this one like that?
It's dirty.
That is a really dirty one. Two-sided lighting, there we go. Inside out apparently. All right, so there's that. So now let's go through and come down to our bump. And we'll go to our file, go to our folder. Not that one, not that one. Let's see. I think the junk one might be good. Okay, I could actually bring in Photoshop the junk and the noise and put them together, and that would have an ultimate one that would match both, but it probably is not necessary for this. All right, so now let's go in here and render this out. Oops, I'm in the wrong program again. I'm in After Effects the first thing in the morning, and then I'm in Intro, which is now Cinema 4D, and everyone has different hotkeys. Show all UI ones. There we go.
Oh, the joys of knowing 1,000 different programs.
Right.
It's not fun, is it?
It's not fun.
No,
Especially when we go into Mari, and then we jump back into Maya, and then we
You know
jump
what
back
they
into
do?
Maya. Yeah.
Just different hotkeys for different screens you're on.
Are you gonna start teaching all these classes in Cinema 4D?
No, just the intro one.
Why did they switch?
Because the cinema class is a bit easier for an introduction into 3D. So for people who are maybe afraid of 3D, it a little bit easier to get into. It does have some neat benefits, like you can duplicate a bunch of stuff. Like all of these clones, I could just duplicate them and randomly place them, as opposed to me moving them physically into each spot, which is nice. Its particle system is kind of crappy though.
Randomize them, I can.
No. I mean, now you can, because they do have some of the stuff, but it's not as easy as cinemas yet. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, now I remember what I was going to say. Like for each cinema, you should have like a little cheat sheet for the hotkeys of each program and have them up there. Just
Yeah,
Separate.
it wouldn't help. It's all just my muscle memory of just going from one to the other. All right, so that looks pretty decent, right? So we could tweak it further or whatever, so that's cool. So save it, close it. I'm not sure why they just disappeared, whatever. And then we can jump back to Mari, and then we could paint something else. Now, as you're painting your stuff, like I said, it's beneficial to make sure that the textures that you have are obviously good enough quality to paint with. If you go in and you grab a low resolution image and you're trying to make it look high res, it's not going to work, okay? Cone's done, let's go to a new one. And scenes. Let's do the signpost. We'll do color, and then we hit OK.
Is that your head you're working on?
That's the Mari default one. That's not my
I
head.
was like, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it is pretty good. It's not mine. All right, so let's go to textures.com real quick. And we'll log in. And I'm just going to grab a couple signposts. That's for the site. There we go. And look at these. You can make, obviously, Chinese, Korean, I'm not sure which one that one is. There we go, no parking anytime. That's what we want. Okay. Now they have two here. The one with the fence obviously has the fence on it, so we'd have to be careful that as we paint it, we don't accidentally get a fence on there. Or we have the one that's transparent. Now they're both the same size. One has transparency, one doesn't. So I'm going to grab this. If this one was bigger and I could get it, I'd probably grab that one and just cut it out in Photoshop myself. That way I have a bigger image to work with. I'll grab that one later. I'm just going to hit the back button and grab another sign. Because I may want one that says no parking anytime and then something else. Now if you have your smartphone out there and you're walking around and you see, hey, there's a cool sign, you may want to just grab a picture of that sign because you may want something, or a brick wall, or anything. Because anything that you grab can be used as a texture. I know people who used to drive around with like actual cameras in their car all the time because they just wanted to grab textures all the time or video all the time. There, nope. All right, so I'm going to go to my image manager. I'm going to drop in these images, and then I'm going to paint them. Now, if I grab one of these images and put it on here, and I size it up, oh my gosh, look at how close I was to modeling that perfectly. I know, just unbelievable. And then I start painting this. What's going to happen is that as I'm painting this, it's actually painting the bar behind it too, right? Unless I changed my settings already. I think I did. Ignore that. So I'm painting this, and then I hit Alt, and then I spin around. You'll see that it's also painting the back of the bar.
And the back of the sign.
And the back of the sign. Okay? So obviously that's not something we want to do. So that's where we would use the front to just paint the front of the sign. And even ignoring this, because sometimes you can get away without using that, that's where I would use the select. So I grab my selector, I would go to my smart selection, I would go to face mode, and I would grab just this face. Okay, and you'll see how Mari isolates just that face because it knows this face is on the UVs, it's all by itself. They're all facing the same way. You probably want to do this to that item.
So when you select it like that, it doesn't go through at all? Because I feel like when I was working on my helmet, I would have it selected and I would paint it and it would still paint things that weren't selected.
We have to still make sure that project on is set to selected only.
Oh,
Because if this is set to all, it'll still paint everything.
okay.
But once it's on there, we should be good. Okay. Now just to test it, I'll drop the no parking sign on here. I'll make it bigger. That one I did not do a good job. So this is where we would use, if my screen was just a bit bigger, squish. No, that's not going to do it. Control Shift. There we go. I'm going to bring this in. Now if you hold down Control Shift, there we go, I can squish it like this. Okay. Now what that's going to do is it's going to stretch out my texture a little bit, but it's not going to matter because I could just rescale out my sign later. So apparently I'm good at making one kind of sign but not the other. Come on, not bigger, bigger, bigger. There we go. Okay, cool. So now I'll just paint this, make the brush bigger. And it already comes with, you know, the dirt and debris on it, so we're good there. So now I hit Alt. And then when we spin around, we should see that we have the no parking, but we don't have the other one. Okay? So then what I would do for this is I could just grab this and grab this. See how smart it is? It just knows exactly what I want. And I could even use, I'm doing the arrow, I could do this. Okay? And hold Shift. Oops, maybe not. No, I don't need to use that one. Just grab this. Okay. Okay, so it's grabbed all of that stuff. I'll grab this too. There we go. And then I could jump back to here. I could even go to the UVs, because this works here too. Okay, and I could say, okay, well, I know that I don't want any of this stuff. Okay, that's the sign. That's good. I'm going to leave that. But I'm going to go into all of these, go to a regular paintbrush, go to a regular color. There we go. Oops, my opacity's still down. There we go. Oh, it's not down. Why aren't you painting on that one? Oh, I know why. Nope, I still have on my projection, I still have my fractal. There we go. And that's probably why this one came out all nice and dirty anyway, because I had that fractal on there. So that fractal, even without using it, look at, yeah, that turned out great. See? Works wonders. Cool. So now I have my no parking anytime sign that looks really grungy. I have the other metal here that's kind of banged up. I can go to my image manager, maybe load in I'm dropping another metal here. And now for something like this, it's very tricky to get in here and try to paint like every single thing. Don't do that. Nobody's going to get that close to the sign that they need to see all of that detail. You can paint it right on top of the UVs. Okay, I can zoom in here to the UVs like this. Maybe make that a little bit bigger. Edge mask is off. Okay. All right, I'm gonna hit undo. I'm gonna add the fractal noise on this, and then take my opacity down some, and then also go to my brush and pick a better brush. That one. Okay, and even though this one's veiny, it could still create a cool look. Okay, and I also hit the semicolon just so I get a repeat of that image, so I don't have to keep moving it. I just moved it there just so I can get a different sampling of it to show different things. I may also need to come down to my fractal and just adjust the seed. The seed is just this random noise pattern. Now you can see that as I did this, it's updating all of my painting because, again, it's not locked in. It's just kind of like floating there as a filter until I hit Alt. Now it's locked in. Now when I adjust seed, it doesn't do anything. Well, it's doing something, just nothing we can see. Okay, and I may want to, I don't really like too much of this brush. I'm gonna go to this one. There we go. See, this brush works out really good. Oops, don't like that too much. There we go. Come down here to these parts. And I could just go through and just paint all of these parts the same exact way. I'll make this brush bigger. Holy cow, there's a lot of stuff in here. And sometimes it helps too just to go over it once with like a bigger brush and then to zoom in and do your finer details. Okay, so something like that. And then I can go into my layers. I'm going to make a new layer here too. Image manager, shrink up, channels. I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to give this a tint. So I'm just going to go in here to like yellow, let's say, like that. I'm going to go in with my color, and I'm just going to color this. And you'll see what it does. It just gives that level of color on top of that gray so it doesn't look so boring. Alright, so now if I switch back to my ortho and zoom out and deselect, there you go. You can see what those signs are looking like. And if I don't like something, I could always come back in and tweak it. I would go back to my regular brush. Let's say I wanted the bottoms to be a bit darker. I'm going to go to my regular brush. I'm going to switch this to a darker brush. Say something like that. Make a new layer in case I mess up. Make this pretty big. Make sure that I'm projecting no fractal noise on this one. No edge mask on this one. I'm painting through, and I'm painting all. Oops, a bit too much. Let's take the opacity down some. Let's take the radius down some. There we go. So now we've added just a little bit of gradation to this just to give it a different feel, okay? Now the other sign still needs its sign on there, so let's go to the selector. Let's grab the front of this. We've made sure this is on. We've made sure that's on. We're painting front only. We're painting selected only. I could even do this in the UVs. So I'll grab the other image. Size it up. That's weird. This one doesn't want to fit.
Like it came into your last selection.
Right. There we go. Okay, back to my ortho. And there are my two signs. Now the back of this looks weird having it like this, so I would definitely want something different there. Because I want to differentiate between the two things. I may not ever see the back of it, but those are the kinds of things you want to pay attention to, because at any point you may realize, hey, I want to use this item for another project. I want to put this in my game. And in a game, people walk in front of it and they turn around and they look at different sides. So let me go to here, let me go to layers. And I've actually added this to a different layer. That's no big deal, because again, I could always adjust it. Push this down. I'm going to add another layer here. Oops, there's my color. Oh, it's not the gray that I wanted. There we go. Okay, that's good. And then I can go to my projection, then turn my fractal noise on. Then go in with a darker color here. There we go. Cool. So now those are done. So then I would go back to my channels here. For this one, I would probably just export everything all at the same time. There's not going to be a whole lot of bump on these. Don't think that everything is like incredibly bumpy. Sometimes it's just deteriorating, right? It's just like darker. Even if I use this as a smaller bump, it would be better than trying to make everything super bumpy. So it's going in my source images. I'm exporting everything. Yes, I didn't hit export flattened. Cancel that. Export flattened channels. There we go. Now, because I already have one item in here, I need to rename this. So I'm going to call this signpost. I leave the layer, I leave the UDIM stuff, and I hit export. Now, because I painted both of these things together, they are the same texture. I don't need to assign one texture to the pole, one texture to the sign, one texture to the other sign. It's the same texture. So let me save my smooth cone inside here. I'm not sure why this is still called smooth cone. And as you build up this workflow, I mean, it's only 6:15. I've been lecturing for an hour. This process goes a lot quicker. You've laid out the UVs in Maya ahead of time. You've exported out the items you want to export. So now it's just going into Mari and just painting the stuff. I typically don't go back into Maya and then paint stuff and then bring it back and then paint stuff and bring it back. I do all my painting, then go into Maya and do my work there. I'm doing it here because I want you to see what the end result is. I want you to see how we can take it back and forth, okay? And if we're not happy with something in Maya, we go back later and we tweak it. So there's my nightclub. And if Mari was working, like on your home computers, like on my home computer, it works fine, going back and forth between Mari and Maya. So I typically do have Maya open at the same time, and then I will jump into Maya and reload it. But if here I'm doing this, I would never do that. It would just take forever. All right, make sure I didn't select this, which I did. Cool. And then I'm going to add a new material to it. Go to my color. And you see how I added it to all 4 of those items. There's my signposts. And I always take this filter type off because what happens is it makes it, a little bit blurry. Yeah, we don't need you right now. Yeah, scoot that over. It's cool. And what's neat about these signs too is they already have a little bolt right there. So it's already on, so that makes sense, right? So now this. So I'm going to group these. I'm going to center pivot it. Bless you. I hit the wrong button. There we go. I'll move this sign down the street. I know, it should have been on my shelf, but me and Dylan share a shelf. There we go. So we'll keep that there, right in front of the building. And then that one's cool where it's at. Okay. So now let's see. I gotta move it back a little bit. Otherwise, there's no point in even making this thing.
What's the name of this? The sign there? What does your sign say?
Dionysus. All right. So now we'll render it out and we'll see what this is looking like. Where's Dionysus?
Yeah.
The god of wine. Parties. And so now we can go through and adjust all the stuff. If we've exported out, it's a little bit darker up here than on my screen. If we've exported out all the layers for the cones, we can just go simply into Photoshop, update that bottom layer, and change the color for it. We want yellow cones or blue cones or green cones. We can just change that one layer, and all the other stuff goes along with it. Okay, as long as we've exported those layers, we can rebuild what that looks like. Okay, same thing with these signs. If I have that sign perfectly clear on one layer, and then I have all this other stuff stacked on top of it, I can go into Photoshop and erase the sign, put a new sign on there, and all that other stuff will just trickle on top of it. Okay? So that's going to be the process for everything you do. I'm going to go through and I will paint some sort of texture on this item here, but I'm going to reuse it on multiple items. As much stuff as you can reuse it. Like we talked about, you can rotate objects around very quickly. You can just add a different texture to it. If you have multiple items inside of your UVs, okay, if you have multiple things fitting this top right quadrant, then those items can have different textures but still be on the same material. So you're still only painting it once, but you're painting it at the same time as all the other stuff. Okay, I'll definitely want to paint the building because there's certain areas of the building that I want to focus a little bit detail on. Here I've added this like knockout, like someone hit the concrete or the brick here and it's like breaking. And then I also have this glass that's going to be there. Now one of the questions is going to be, how would I paint glass, right? You're not painting glass, you're painting the dirt that would be on the glass, right? So imagine that you have transparency, but in some of these areas you don't have transparency. That's what we're painting, is those areas you don't have transparency. Especially for something like this, I want to paint what these glass breaking shards would look like because that's going to give me a nice texture to it. And then I'll have transparency on there that'll make it look like it's a little bit transparent. And I'll also have something behind this that, you know, I don't want to make an entire nightclub. I want to have just like something there. So I'll probably have curtains there because I don't want people seeing inside the club at night, right? So I'll have curtains there, curtains here, curtains there. That's going to be something else, so I don't care about that. Oh, I did open these boxes too, just so you can see.
What's in there?
There's nothing in there. Kittens. I do have garbage bags.
It's the details.
It's the details. I haven't touched that at all. And then, what is that?
What's in the box?
Oh,
What's in the damn?
this is a red cup. That's what that's going to be. It's going to be a red cup, and I will have several of these strewn about, because the people will party, right?
Don't give out red cups at the club.
I don't know. I don't go to clubs.
Red solo cups in the club?
Yeah.
What
It's a
else
to-go
you ping
cup.
pong with, man?
It's a to-go cup.
You ever try to bring
I
another
don't think
cup?
they give those
Just
out
doesn't
either.
work.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't worry,
So
man.
that's going to be the process. So model your stuff, lay out your UVs, take them into Mari and paint what needs to be painted, and then we'll go from there.
Put some bullet holes in the front.
Question?
Yeah, just because I don't remember when you said, when is this environment due?
I wrote it down, didn't I?
It's a 3 week last week.
But you didn't actually say the day.
Yeah, like
No, I
that's
did not,
what
did
I'm
I?
saying.
Do,
I gotta
do.
get this.
Right, I need to know when I need this done by.
We will say that we will have this done by the 31st.
Halloween,
Okay?
Sean?
Halloween. So by the 31st. So you can turn it in ahead of time if you want.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Deal.
Worst reaction ever. Yeah, right.
Okay. So we'll have this due. We're going to be doing 3 stills. And then I also want to show how we can take this and put it into a game, into a gaming environment, so we could actually walk around it. Okay? So that'll just be an extra thing in case you want to do that. Cool.